Everything you learned about the Bible in school might be completely wrong. I've spent 20 years digging through this land, and every layer reveals secrets no one expected. Melted pottery, temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees. This isn't legend, it's evidence. Walls that stood for millennia fell in a single day, exactly as it was written. 10 places, 10 warnings carved in stone. And you need to see every single one of them.
Cities that once dominated the ancient world are now excavation sites. Temples that received thousands of pilgrims became ruins where tourists take selfies. And a place the Bible describes as fertile and prosperous transformed into a desert so complete that nothing has grown there for millennia. In this video, you will discover 10 biblical places and find out what remains of them. The first place carries 11,000 years of history, stacked in layers of destruction and reconstruction. Jericho, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. 1,000 years before the pyramids, walls already existed there. In the year 1400 before Christ, when Joshua and the Israelites arrived, Jericho was no rookie in warfare. It was a professional survivor. 20 different civilizations had already built and been destroyed on that same mound. Beneath the streets that existed in Joshua's time, archaeologists found a stone tower from the 8th millennium before Christ, the oldest structure ever discovered by human hands. The city occupied 3 hectares at the top of a tell. Houses made of mud bricks, paved streets, water cisterns, grain storage facilities. The spring of Elisha, which exists to this day, provided fresh water for the entire population. Merchants brought spices from the east, textiles from the north, metals from the south. Anyone who wanted to climb into the mountains of Canaan needed to pass through Jericho and pay taxes. But what made Jericho truly intimidating were the walls. It was not just one wall. It was a double defense system. An outer stone wall 3.5 meters high. Behind it, a second wall even taller. Between the two, space for soldiers to patrol. The base was so thick that houses were built inside them. Rahab, the prostitute who helped the Israelite spies, lived in one of those houses. Her window faced outside the city. Today, Tel Es Sultan is a UNESCO heritage site. You walk through there and see the layers of 11,000 years of civilizations stacked up. You see the ancient stone tower. You see the remains of the walls. And you think this city survived everything for millennia, until it fell with a shout. The walls were not knocked down by battering rams or siege ladders. They fell supernaturally, after 7 days of silent marching and a single collective shout. And the archaeological detail no one expected to find. The walls fell outward, not inward, as if something from inside pushed everything to the outside. The second place was burned from the sky, and to this day, archaeologists find melted pottery in the soil. For decades, scholars searched for Sodom and Gomorrah. Most believed they were mythological cities, stories invented to scare children. But in 2013, a team found something disturbing near the Dead Sea, an archaeological site called Tol El Hammam. And when they began to excavate, they realized they had found evidence of a catastrophe that defies explanation. The city was prosperous. It sat on a fertile plain, an important trade route with abundant water. They estimate it had between 8 and 10,000 inhabitants, which for that era was a metropolis. Thick walls, palaces, temples. Sodom was not a poor village. It was a regional power. But according to the Bible, the problem was not poverty. It was pride, arrogance so great that God decided to intervene personally. And then, according to Genesis, fire and brimstone fell from the sky. The city was destroyed in a single day. Lot and his family fled. When his wife looked back, she turned into a pillar of salt. It sounds like a movie plot. But here is what archaeologists found at Tol El Hammam. Evidence of an explosion 3,700 years ago. Temperatures that exceeded 2,000 degrees Celsius, melted pottery that turned to glass, mud bricks that literally exploded, and stranger still, thick layers of salt. Salt that contaminated the soil for 600 to 700 years after the destruction. Nothing grew there. Some scientists suggest it was a meteor. Others speak of an underground methane gas explosion. The debate continues, but the fact remains. Something destroyed that city so violently that it left permanent physical marks. And it happened exactly in the region where the Bible places Sodom. Today, Tal el-Hammam is an archaeological field. You can visit and see the layers of destruction. The melted pottery is still there, frozen in time. A silent testimony of a day when the sky caught fire. The third place was the largest city in Canaan, and Joshua made sure to burn it completely while all other cities were merely conquered. Hazor had 40,000 inhabitants. Jerusalem, in the time of David, centuries later, had fewer people than that. When you think of Hazor at its peak, imagine a metropolis. The city occupied 80 hectares in the upper section and another 70 hectares in the lower city. Thick stone walls surrounded everything. Palaces with columns, temples dedicated to Baal and Astarte, bronze workshops, warehouses full of grain. The streets were paved, public fountains distributed water, merchants from Syria, Egypt and Cyprus traded in the central square. Hazor controlled the northern trade routes. If you wanted to go from Egypt to Mesopotamia, you passed through Hazor and paid taxes. But it was not just economics. Hazor was military power. The king of Hazor commanded a confederation of cities. When Joshua invaded Canaan, it was the king of Hazor who organized the resistance. He gathered all the other kings, assembled the armies, set up camp near the waters of Merom. It was the largest military force the Israelites had ever faced. War chariots, cavalry, heavy infantry. Joshua won the battle. But here is the crucial difference. Of all the cities he conquered, only Hazor was completely burned. The others he left intact for the Israelites to occupy later. Hazor needed to be an example, and it was. Yigael Yadin excavated Hazor between 1955 and 1958, and again in the 60s. He found 21 layers of different civilizations built one on top of another. But one specific layer draws attention. Thick ashes, collapsed structures, everything dated to 1200 before Christ by carbon-14 analysis. Exactly Joshua's era. And there is more. In 2012, the team of Amnon Bentor from Hebrew University found ceramic jars full of burned wheat. The grain was stored, ready for use. The city fell fast. No one had time to evacuate the supplies. Today, Hazor is a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2005, along with Megiddo and Beersheba. The site is 14 kilometers north of the Sea of Galilee. You walk through there and see pieces of walls, palace foundations, a monumental basalt stairway 4.5 meters wide. The jars with carbonized wheat are in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. But no one lives there. The largest city in Canaan turned to dust. The fourth place was cursed by Jesus, and it was not just any city, it was where he lived, where he performed more miracles than anywhere else. Capernaum sat on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, strategic location. The Via Maris, the commercial highway connecting Egypt with Syria, passed right through there. Caravans stopped in the city to rest, resupply, and trade. It had a Roman customs post where Matthew worked collecting taxes. Fishermen went out to sea every morning and returned with nets full of fish. The market sold bread, oil, pottery, fabrics. Population estimated at 1,500 people by the standards of that era, a medium-sized city, but with good income. The synagogue was the heart of the community. Built with black basalt stones, thick pillars supporting the roof. Every Sabbath, men gathered there to read the Torah, discuss the law, and pray. And it was in that very synagogue that Jesus began to teach. Matthew chapter 4 calls Capernaum his own city. He did not just visit, he lived there. Peter, James, John, Andrew, all had houses in Capernaum. Jesus returned there after his travels, and it was there that more miracles happened than anywhere else. Jesus healed the centurion's servant without even touching the sick man. He healed Peter's mother-in-law of fever. A paralytic was lowered through the roof because the house was so packed that no one else could fit. And Jesus healed him in front of everyone. He cast out demons. He calmed storms on the sea. The entire city saw these things. But here is the problem. Seeing miracles did not change people's hearts. They treated Jesus as entertainment. They came to watch, to listen, but they did not repent. So Jesus did something no prophet had ever done before. He cursed the very city where he lived. In Matthew 11, he says Capernaum will go down to Hades, that if Sodom had seen the miracles Capernaum saw, it would still be standing today. And the curse was fulfilled. Capernaum was gradually abandoned after the 6th century. The Franciscan friars purchased the land in 1894 and began systematic excavations. Virgilio Corbo and Stanislao Lofreda excavated between 1968 and 1985. They identified Peter's house beneath a 5th century Byzantine octagonal church. The white limestone synagogue you see today is from the 4th century, but it was built over the black basalt foundations of the 1st century synagogue where Jesus taught. Today, Capernaum is administered by the custodians of the Holy Land, a city that rejected the Messiah himself, reduced to ruins, visited by pilgrims. The 5th place was prophesied 600 years before to be abandoned. And today, literally, no one lives there. At its peak, Ashkelon had 13,000 inhabitants. The city sat right on the sea with a protected natural harbor. Ships from Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt docked there to trade. Inside the walls, which were 15 meters high and 50 meters wide at the base, life bustled. Markets sold Tyrian purple, Athenian marble, Egyptian grain. Temples dedicated to Dagon and Baal-zebub stood in the center. Palaces with gardens occupied the noble quarter. The Philistines were not barbarians. They had culture, architecture, advanced metallurgy. But Ashkelon had a problem. The prophets of Israel hated it, not because the city had attacked Jerusalem directly, but because it represented everything Israel was not. The Philistines worshipped idols, practiced rituals that the Israelites considered abominations. Prophet after prophet announced judgment. Amos, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, all spoke against Ashkelon, but it was Zechariah who gave the most specific prophecy. Ashkelon will be deserted. Zechariah chapter 9 verse 5, in 604 before Christ. Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon invaded the region. Ashkelon tried to resist. It closed its gates, reinforced its walls, stockpiled food. It was no use. The Babylonians were war machines. They broke through the walls, invaded the city, killed the king, deported the population. Ashkelon fell. But here is the impressive detail. The city was rebuilt afterward. Greeks occupied it, Romans occupied it, Byzantines occupied it, but it never returned to what it once was, and over time it was gradually abandoned. Until in 1191, Richard the Lionheart destroyed what remained to prevent the Muslims from using the port. After that, no one ever rebuilt. Today, Ashkelon is a national park. Archaeologists excavated and found the first Philistine cemetery ever discovered, with 145 skeletal remains. They found figurines, painted pottery, gold jewelry, but no one lives there. The prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. The 6th place suffered the worst military siege in ancient history, and the Assyrians documented everything in giant reliefs. Lachish was the 2nd most important city in Judah, second only to Jerusalem. It sat on a strategic hill, controlling the road between the coast and the mountains of Judea. If you wanted to attack Jerusalem coming from the west, you needed to pass through Lachish first. That is why King Rehoboam, son of Solomon, heavily fortified the place. Double walls surrounded the city. The outer one was 6 meters thick, the inner one 4 meters. Watchtowers covered every angle. A monumental gate with 6 chambers controlled the entrance. Inside, limestone houses, warehouses, workshops, water cisterns. Population estimated at 6,000 people. But in 701 before Christ, Sennacherib of Assyria invaded Judah. He had already conquered 46 cities, deported 200,000 people. Now he wanted Lachish, and he made a point of documenting everything. Because Lachish represented Jewish resistance. If Lachish fell, Jerusalem would be isolated. The siege was brutal. Archaeologists found a siege ramp the Assyrians built. It was not a simple ramp. It was a massive structure made of 3 million stones, each weighing an average of 6 kilograms. Assyrian soldiers carried those stones, stacked them one by one, creating an access route up to the walls. Meanwhile, archers launched arrows upward, preventing the defenders from reacting. Mobile siege towers were pushed up the ramp. Battering rams pounded the walls. Inside the city, chaos. Archaeologists found ash layers 6 meters thick, Assyrian arrowheads embedded in the walls, skeletons of people who tried to flee and were killed. A mass grave with more than 1,500 bodies thrown without ceremony. Lachish resisted as long as it could, but it fell. Sennacherib enjoyed this victory so much that he ordered giant reliefs carved showing the siege. Those reliefs are in the British Museum today. 27 meters of carved stone showing soldiers pushing up the ramp, siege towers attacking, prisoners being impaled, families being deported. It is the most detailed visual documentation of an ancient siege that we have. Lachish was rebuilt afterward, but it never recovered its importance. Today it is a tell, an archaeological mound. You climb up there and see the ramp still preserved. You see the broken walls, and you imagine the terror. The 7th place suffered something even worse than military siege. Famine, and it reached cannibalism. What drives a mother to cook her own child? Hunger. Hunger so extreme that sanity disappears. And this happened in Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Samaria was rich, very rich. King Omri chose a strategic hill and built the capital from scratch in 880 before Christ. It was not a renovation of an old city, it was a new project, planned. The hill sat 90 meters above the valley, providing a complete view of the region. Double walls of white limestone gleamed in the sun. The palace of Ahab, son of Omri, had walls decorated with carved ivory, not painted ivory, real ivory imported from Africa. Entire panels covered the walls. That is why the Bible calls it the Ivory House in 1 Kings chapter 22. Inside the city, a life of luxury. Cisterns carved into rock guaranteed water even during drought. Warehouses stored wine, oil, wheat. The market sold purple fabrics from Tyre, spices from Arabia, jewelry from Egypt. Population estimated at 30,000 people. Samaria was not just a political capital, it was a symbol of prosperity. But in 725 before Christ, King Hoshea made a fatal mistake. He stopped paying tribute to Assyria. Shalmaneser V did not like that. The Assyrian army marched to Samaria, surrounded the city, and waited 3 years. They did not attack the walls. They simply cut off access. Nothing came in, nothing went out, and they waited for the city to starve to death. In the first year, they ate the reserves. In the second, they slaughtered the animals. In the third, there was nothing left. And that is when the horror recorded in 2 Kings chapter 6 occurred. 2 women made an agreement. They cooked the son of one. The next day, when it was time to cook the son of the other, the second woman hid her child. The story reached the ears of the king, who tore his robes in despair. In 722 before Christ, the walls finally fell. Sargon II, who had assumed the Assyrian throne, entered the city and deported 27,290 people. Modern excavations confirmed that the ancient ivory palace described in the Bible was exactly on the hill of Samaria. Original fragments of the ivory panels were found at the site and are now preserved in museums in Jerusalem. The hill, currently known as Sebastia, became an important archaeological site where ruins of the palace, walls and temples can still be visited. The eighth place is different. It did not die once. It died 26 times, and it will die again in the final battle of the world. Megiddo, or Armageddon in Greek. There is a place in the Holy Land where 26 battles have already occurred, and according to the book of Revelation, the last one is yet to come. Megiddo sits in a position any general would dream of controlling. The Tell, that archaeological mound 20 meters high, dominates the Jezreel Valley. From the top, you see kilometers of plain in every direction. The Via Maris, the most important commercial highway of the ancient world, passed right through there. Armies from Egypt heading up to attack Mesopotamia had to pass through Megiddo. Armies from Mesopotamia heading down to Egypt, the same. There was no detour. That is why 26 different civilizations occupied the same place. Canaanites built, Egyptians destroyed and rebuilt. Israelites conquered, Philistines attacked, Assyrians razed, Persians occupied, Greeks took over, Romans dominated. Each civilization built on the ruins of the previous one, layer upon layer, creating this artificial mound of 20 meters made literally of dead cities stacked up. Solomon transformed Megiddo into a fortress. He built thick walls, stables for 450 horses, a water system that descended 40 meters to the water table. The city gate had 6 chambers, identical to the gates of Hazor and Gezer. Same architect, same design. But being strategic has a price. In 609 before Christ, Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt was marching to help Assyria against Babylon. King Josiah of Judah tried to block the passage at Megiddo. Fatal mistake. Necho was not interested in Judah. He just wanted to pass through. But Josiah insisted. The battle did not last long. An arrow struck Josiah. He died on the way back to Jerusalem. The most righteous king of Judah died trying to defend a pass. Napoleon visited Megiddo in 1799 and called the place the perfect battlefield. He knew how to recognize military terrain when he saw it. The Jezreel Plain can hold entire armies. It has space for maneuvers, total visibility, access to water. That is why Revelation chapter 16 places the final battle there. Har Megiddo in Hebrew, Armageddon in Greek, the place where all the armies of the world will gather at the end of times. Megiddo today is a national park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, along with Hazor and Beersheba. Tourists climb the Tell and see the 26 layers of destruction. They see Solomon's stables, they see the 6-chambered gate, and they look at the empty plain thinking about the prophecy that will still be fulfilled. The 9th place is the most sacred of all, and it was destroyed twice, burned to the foundations, and rebuilt with blood and tears, Jerusalem. The city God chose to place his name. David conquered it from the Jebusites around 1000 before Christ. Solomon built the most expensive temple in ancient history there. 150,000 men worked for 7 years. Stones weighing 400 tons were moved without modern machinery. Cedars from Lebanon were brought from hundreds of kilometers away. And when everything was finished, the glory of God descended so intensely that the priests could not remain standing. But in 586 before Christ, Nebuchadnezzar burned everything. The fire was so intense, it transformed limestone into calcium oxide. The gold melted and ran into the cracks. The Babylonian soldiers had to dismantle the walls stone by stone to recover the metal. Not one stone was left upon another. 70 years later, a group of exiles returned and rebuilt. A smaller temple, simpler, but standing. 500 years later, Herod expanded everything in a pharaonic construction project. The Western Wall that millions touch today is Herod's work, not Solomon's. But in 70 after Christ, the Romans burned everything again. This time, the destruction was even more complete. The temple was never rebuilt. To this day, 1,954 years later, the Temple Mount remains without a Jewish temple. Jerusalem was destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times. But it still stands, and it continues to be contested like no other city on earth. The 10th place became a desert so complete it looks like another planet, and the transformation was not gradual. It was instantaneous. The region around the Dead Sea, where Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar once stood, the cities of the plain. Genesis chapter 13 describes this region before the destruction. Lot looked and saw the whole plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. It was fertile, green, prosperous. That is why Lot chose to go there when he separated from Abraham. But after fire and brimstone fell from the sky, the transformation was absolute. Today, the Dead Sea region is the lowest point on the Earth's surface, 430 meters below sea level. The salt concentration is so high that no fish survives. No plant grows on its shores. The air is dense, heavy, loaded with minerals. The landscape looks lunar. Salt formations rise like bizarre sculptures. The heat is suffocating. Archaeologists found evidence that the region was densely populated during the Bronze Age. Prosperous cities, irrigated agriculture, active trade. Everything disappeared in a single catastrophic event. The destruction layers showed temperatures that exceeded 2,000 degrees, salt that contaminated the soil for centuries. The Bible says Abraham looked from afar on the morning after the destruction and saw smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. 3,700 years later, the region still bears the scars. A garden like Eden transformed into a dead desert. Permanent testimony of what happens when entire cities defy the Creator. 10 places, some still standing, others reduced to dust. Walls that seemed eternal were dissolved by water. Cities that defied God became excavation fields. And temples built to last millennia were burned to the foundations. Sodom burned, Nineveh fell, Samaria was deported. Every city that ignored the divine warning paid the price recorded in Scripture and confirmed by archaeology. But Jericho was rebuilt, Jerusalem rose from the ashes, and Capernaum, even cursed, still receives pilgrims who want to see where Jesus taught. The history of these places reveals a pattern. God warns, man chooses. And the consequences remain engraved in the earth so that future generations may learn. The ruins teach. The question is whether we are willing to listen.